Look at that. Okay, we are live. I don't know if anyone's watching right now, but hello and welcome.
Come on, you're watching the morning.
Right. Yeah, I was
You're gonna
talking to
all
someone
tune
earlier.
in. How many people did I see that said, "Well, I don't know that I'm gonna make it to the live stream because that's kind of late, but we'll make it. I might check it out in the morning."
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Like, yeah. Um, it's the late thing works for me though. Honestly,
I know it worked
it's
for
way
me too.
better.
It's actually, no, believe me, the earlier would have been me going. I don't think it's gonna work today.
Yeah, I know. I'd be like, as my kids run in through the door because this one doesn't lock, and it's just like, oh hi, yep. And they're just
Yeah, we
constantly
would have had a
banging
lot of
screens.
that going on because it would have been more of a question of which child is going to show up first. It would be very cute. We'd have them all pop up here.
Yes. Yeah, it would be very
Maybe for
cute.
another one.
Okay. But
I'm
anyways,
going to confuse everybody real quick here by mirroring my
yes.
camera so that you guys can see correctly. Because now let me see. Now you can read it.
Okay, yeah.
So
Looks
that
good on
should
my
be right.
side.
Yep. Now
But
you can
yeah,
read it.
I guess I should probably
All
get to the
right.
point. We are talking with uh anonymous Mr. Anonymous, I don't know, anonymous. And
Anonymous, Mr. Unicorn, whichever one works. I don't know whether unicorn
unicorn, yeah, I like it.
seems to be in my chair. Oh,
And author of The Wars of Wrath, as it says on the name thing there, which is the first book, Gurzil, or however the heck you say it.
You got it right. You've always got it right.
Okay, sweet. And then the second book, Badon Hill, which came out, was this come out in August now? Yeah, was
Yeah.
it August?
Yep. But the
Okay,
audiobook should be out in a month or two.
month or two. Okay, sweet. But yeah, you can get the first one audiobook right now and digital, of course, and physical.
And
So,
I actually did promise anybody that tuned in that I would tell them how to get a free ebook. It's going to be very easy. Right now, you just go to Amazon and you go to Badon Hill by Anonymous and you download it because it's free week at the moment. So it's free for the next 2 days.
sweet,
Cool.
awesome, yeah.
So
I would
you
jump
can
on that.
download that or buy Gurzil, or if you've already read Gurzil, just you could get your free Badon Hill. Some people must have Gurzil because they had thousands of free downloads, but
Really, geez, wow, that's nice.
well, not really. They don't get paid for the free
Well,
downloads.
okay, well, it's nice that it's in more hands, I guess.
Yeah, nice that more people are reading it. That is
Yes.
obedience matter.
Hopefully that pays future bills. It might not be paying present
Hopefully,
bills.
hopefully, because it is now.
Okay.
That is just the world of self-published authors.
Right, yeah, which actually I think I saw you mention once. I can't remember what server was it on. I don't know what it was. Was it
It could have been any of them.
I don't remember what Discord
I
server it
belong
was.
to them all, so it's
Yeah.
like,
So, man, but I think I saw once that you mentioned that you actually originally wrote the first two novels, so the two that are out on like some website or something, or like
think
published them
it.
on some website.
Yeah, that would have been a while ago. Yeah, no. Originally, I published the first one on was read on was done through Inkit, and
Hmm.
which is basically the sort of the successor to Wattpad.
Oh, really? Okay.
So, unlike Wattpad, though, you can leave comments on each chapter that they read. So it's a little bit more of a um, beta reading kind of platform. So
Okay.
once you write the first book, you need somebody to read through it that doesn't love you. That's that tends to be the hardest thing, honestly. We have friends or girlfriends or parents or coworkers, whoever is going to read the book.
Hmm.
There's somebody that sees you on a regular basis, and so they can't be brutal. Unlike in a they can't tell you that you need to like lose the massive info dump at the beginning,
Uh huh.
or that this plot aspect doesn't play as well as you might have thought. Let's face it, some actual traditionally published authors probably need that to be said as well. There are plot aspects in some of our favorite books that we go, would this not have been better if it didn't have the incest, or it didn't have the this aspect or that X factor that they put in there?
Yes, that is.
So so yeah, starting there, I would almost always say you got to start someplace, and then because people can be more brutal and not have to feel like there's going to be repercussions. For instance, I'll even say this one. For instance, Liam, when I'm going through and I'm critiquing your thing, and I'm like, okay, there's a lot of highlighting that I'm doing here. I need to make sure that he's actually like expecting that as opposed to the gold star, because this is very good, but it could be better.
Yeah, no,
It's a very good book. It was a very good story. I liked it. I really did.
Okay, well, that's good. Yeah, it's definitely. I actually only discovered recently the difference between things like just proofreading and copy editing and developmental editing.
Well, you don't find there's no way to discover this until you actually get to a point past where you're like, I should have already known this. Oh, I think we lost Kate.
Maybe he'll come back in a second.
Maybe he'll come back. But I will say this: you'll never get to the point where you know where you're basically. Once you think that you should query, you probably aren't there yet. You need to go 2 or 3 steps beyond where you thought you were. He's back.
I got kicked out. I think my internet's doing bad things tonight, but that's fine.
Happens.
It happens. That's what happens when you live in the last frontier and all that.
Here, where I have great internet, because everywhere else in my house I don't.
Right. Actually, it's funny. I bought a 25-foot Ethernet cord to plug into my computer for this thing. Yeah. So because I was like, yeah, I really don't want this to cut out while we're talking. But I used to actually stream like video games. That's what I did for a few months back in 2020.
Yep.
And that's why I introduced myself as Himvar on all my videos, because that was like the name I went by when I was streaming. So
what were you streaming?
It was mostly MMOs. It was like Guild Wars 2 and EverQuest 2. That was about it, actually. So
I don't know. I had the big Ethernet cord when I broke my head, and I ended up with it like sitting on a pillow for like months. And that's how I ended up playing. It was just when Star Wars: Old Republic came out. So I'm probably one of the few people I actually know that has played through all of the characters' quest lines in Old Republic. Nobody else that I've ever met has done this. It is actually worthwhile. I would like them to come out with adapt it to a single player, so that I don't, because I'm not going back and trying to, build the guild and all of that, so I can actually defeat the other side quests. Not doing that. Don't have time in my life.
I never actually finished either of those games. I have one of them actually just down here for my Xbox, but fun games though, fun times. Those are old. Or they're getting there rather.
Liam, we have children. We don't play as we used to, do we?
No, I was actually telling a friend about that today.
I was like, I used to play. I haven't even beaten the new Assassin's Creed, and that's rare for me.
Yeah. I don't finish anything. So
nothing at all. Right, because it doesn't. It's much more forgiving when you have to put it down suddenly.
Yeah. Right. We do have a couple people in the chat here. I actually know these people right here. Let's see. We got Miserable
okay.
Minis. That is my brother, or maybe my sister-in-law. It's probably my brother. And Nathrak is an old follower here. Hello, Nathrak or Karth.
I'm gonna adjust my mask. Nobody sees who I am because that would just spoil this whole thing. We'll lose the mystique, and that would not be good.
The whole anonymous thing.
Yeah. Well, there are two reasons for that, which I'll explain in just a second. Once I get this going, here we go. There are two reasons for that, which let's see if I can get that. There we go. Okay.
Alaska Pod.
There we go. Yeah. So, okay. Now I got a lag.
That was one thing I was going to ask you though. I guess is like, I had a couple questions on the lines of anonymous. It's too late. I'm too tired. I'm going to missay the word anonymity like 500 times. But why did you decide to go with the, I don't know, being anonymous?
We're having technical difficulties. There we go. Okay, we're just gonna go back to the one where I'm not getting a lag. There were two reasons for it. I knew that this was always going to be the question. This is everybody's first question. Why are you anonymous?
Right.
And you're everywhere. I'm like the anonymous everywhere person. But one of the reasons for this was very much that I did that on Inkit. It felt a lot better to be not as public because it's just a crazy place there. But over time it kind of evolved for reasons. Due to what I did for a living, it was more prudent to not be a public figure. And so at this point it sounds stupid, but it's like, I when you start this, you have those visions that you're going to be the best-selling author, and there was that. What would happen if it did actually happen? You don't want that to be a negative in your life,
right? Yeah.
But the other reason is that I'm writing that I don't believe that the Arthurian legend or the legend of St. George belong to anyone. They belong to everyone. There is no canon to either story. There are people that wrote about the story later on in history, but the story itself that we have is lost. It's never going to be found. And so, Monty Python has as much right to it as Sir Thomas Mallory. And so I didn't feel like putting an actual name to that story was appropriate.
Okay. Okay. I like that. Actually, I like the idea there. Especially like I've heard it described as like communal property when you have like stories this old, right? It's just like, it doesn't, and I like the idea that it doesn't technically belong to me. I think it's interesting though, still, that you still went with anonymous when you could have, say, like made up a fake name. Even then, I guess I realize a fake name would it doesn't have to, but it would presumably still keep you out of the spotlight. But
yeah, there's the other point to anonymous, and I will be now suddenly ruin my lovely little thing I just said before this, is that especially at the beginning, before I wrote the second book and all of that, it did have that, well, if I'm anonymous, one day I can put my actual name to it and be who I am. And it won't be like if you had a pen name, you're that person for the rest of your, Anne Rice is Anne Rice for the rest of her life. If you wanted to, even if you want to put your name on it, nobody's going to remember that the famous one is, Mark Twain would sign all of his work Samuel Clemens. How many people know that Samuel Clemens is Mark Twain? They don't. So
Right.
I did keep the sort of anonymous aspect to this. And eventually it added to the mystique. It's kind of a mysterious book. And there is a plot element to this that will come in probably 9 books from now. So I'm not going to tell you about it. But there is a plot element to it as well, where you will learn the person who is technically your narrator. He does exist. He is a person. He is going to be a character in the book that you will recognize. And the ending is the ending is already written. It's one of those, most of the middle is not, but the ending of the very end of the series is already decided on. And it does play into that.
Huh. That's pretty cool. I look forward to figuring that out, though.
You will not figure out my ending. You can try.
Well,
you might. You possibly do know enough that you could, but I still don't think you will.
Yeah, I'll just wager I probably won't figure it out at all. But but I'm looking forward to it, whatever it is. I think it's funny on one of the comments he said actually that I was watching based off like a pin name type thing. I was watching a documentary remembering Fritz Leiber that came out like shortly after his death in the early 90s, and it had like a bunch of like short little interview segments from authors. And this one author comes on, and I'm like, who is this lady? I have no clue who this is, and I look her up, and I was like, oh, it's Robin Hobb. That
one screws everybody up because we all don't expect Robin Hobb to be a woman.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I was just like, okay, I can't like in this other name that's not Robin Hobb. This is just some random person. Yeah. Right, so like, but so it's just interesting. So we have T in the chat since apparently his internet was not great enough to stay on, I guess, with us. It's okay, T. We love you. But and then we also have Drew.
Hi, T. We miss you.
Yes, we miss you, T. And then we have Drew as well from Drew's Book Reviews.
Hi, Drew. Always a pleasure.
Yeah. And
so
he
we
says,
have a question from Drew.
Yep.
It says 9 books from now. How long is the series? The series was 7. Okay, so the original series was originally a standalone book that then became a trilogy, that then became a 5-book series, and then became 7 books, and has now that I pretty much finished book 3. Book 3 had to split into 2 books. So book 3 has. And now it's at 9. Now it's about at 8 or 9 books. It's going to land someplace in between those 2. But again, I write. Part of what I do is I write shorter books. I don't write these. A lot of books you would read, a lot of fantasy, would almost have 3 episodes. Badon Hill and Gurzil could very well be a single book in a lot of books you read now. And it wouldn't even be all that long compared to some of them. But I kind of like the idea of them being in digestible chunks.
Yeah, that was one thing that just came to mind before you said that I I like how thin they are. I'll read a big thick book just like most fantasy readers will. Right, but like,
well, we all love Way of Kings. Come on.
Right, yeah. Not everyone, but I do. So like, but I really do. I really like. I found in the past couple of years that I like these. I don't want to say like I mean, what? This is Badon Hill. This is like 300, a little over 300 pages. I mean, that's not tiny. I mean, I
No,
guess it is by most standards for today. But I mean,
right.
like even if you went a couple decades ago, that's actually
I was going to
larger than a lot.
say, if you went back, I look at this one and say, you want to know where the split happened? You can look at it at the original, like first 4 Harry Potters, and then you look at the Harry Potters the subsequent ones. Goblet of
Mhm.
Fire onwards. They're bricks, but the first
Yeah,
ones are these relatively short books and digestible books. I mean, I'm trying to think. Well, not on this one. But if you look at like series like the Chronicles of Narnia, yeah, if you read the whole thing, that's a pretty substantial read to go through
hmm
the whole epic. But if you just read books, if you just read the one book or the at a time kind of thing, they're pretty digestible. You can finish them in a few hours.
right. Yeah. I'll come in with my one of my reader blasphemies that I haven't actually read any of Narnia. Um,
Wow, okay? You're fine though. You want to know what? I'll be honest that I had read some of Narnia, but I had not started reading the whole thing. I only got to reading the whole thing because I started reading them to my daughter.
right. Yeah. I
So
plan on
you're
doing that
fine. You're
actually.
going to read them to your kid, and then you'll have read
Yeah.
Narnia.
Right. Yeah. I do plan on reading them to my
When you're
kids.
doing that, there's no impetus to do it.
Right. Yeah. So I have read the first 2 of Lewis's space trilogy though. I need to read the 3rd one still, but
I have not read that yet. I need to read that, but
pretty good. Pretty
I
good.
do like a lot of C.S. Lewis's stuff. And I will say this about C.S. My favorite C.S. Lewis and Tolkien deal is that you arrived as a writer when decades after you're gone and dead, people are reading your correspondence to your writers group.
Right.
If they download, save the Discord because one day they might be useful.
Right. That's so weird.
No letters.
Yeah, it's cool, right? Yeah, because you're right. I mean, like I have a copy of Tolkien's letters. There
Really?
are 2 volumes of letters just between Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft, and they're big volumes. And
I
that doesn't
actually have
include
not read
everything
them. I
else
do need to
Lovecraft
be.
wrote. So,
I've only just started getting back into Lovecraft. Lovecraft was something I was into, and then I think I read one of those very politically incorrect pieces that he made, and there
yeah.
were a few of them, and then had to stop for a while. It was the same with Tarzan for me. You know, I'll be honest, the John Carter series were better, but when it came to Tarzan, it really it was one of those. This has not aged well at all. So
Yeah.
was she and like King Solomon's Mine, but Tarzan was just on a different level. I think.
Right. I have not read Tarzan. I think I would like to read some of those at some point. But kind of for that reason that I went to the Barsoom books first. I've only read the first 3 Barsoom books, and even there, I mean, like you can tell it's definitely a product of its time. I mean, the books are over 100 years old, and
Right,
and
right.
he starts off the first book by calling the Apaches savages and stuff. So like, but
He was a little bit better about it in
mhm,
that one. You could see how it was a product of his time, and I could go into lots of historical reasons why that was going on, but you could see that even there it wasn't so much. It was just the terminology that was used at that time.
right, yeah, and he's got like it's that weird like enlightenment idea of the noble savage, like
Right, right.
Rousseau thing.
You see it
So
in you see. I go with the whole. Was Disney a racist? No, but was he a product? Did he sell exactly what he believed his audiences would go for? Yes.
yes. All right, let's see. Depressed Oreo Shake, Shannon came in. Let's see.
Oh
T
well.
said, Yeah, Olo, that's what he says. And then T also mentioned the canon
Okay.
thing with the Merlin TV show. Um,
I liked. I'll be perfectly honest. Of the Arthurian adaptations, I enjoyed the Merlin TV show. I really did. I found that to be one of the that as what it for what it was very enjoyable. One character, I'm going to be honest, one character, this is one of the things I'll say about, especially my book, when you write Arthurian fiction, and something I do with the Wars of Wrath a lot, is that you get to take one or two characters that you say, this character was done well in this adaptation. And you could chuck the rest of it if you want. Well, not all of it, but some of it. But for the Merlin TV show, the bit that I took and I thought he was done wonderfully was the Uther Pendragon character. I thought he was a very good character. The other one that I think, and I'll be honest, I think it was what carried the show for as long as it did, was their Morgana was perfect.
Yeah,
Morgana was what we they all for the way that they portrayed her as the villain, but not always the villain. I really enjoyed how Morgana was portrayed in that. I think it was one of the best Morgana portrayals that was ever done. Like, and if we were going to say Guinevere, though, I would say it was not my favorite Guinevere. I found other Guineveres to be more appealing.
like this one. Is this Guinevere? I think this is Guinevere, right?
Yeah, that would be Guinevere.
Okay.
Okay, so we can say which Guinevere I took. I thought that if we were going to take a Guinevere, the Keira Knightley Guinevere from the King Arthur movie a couple years ago, the one with Clive Owen and everybody. I did not love the history. I think it was not the best Arthurian adaptation. But I do think that Keira Knightley was probably the best portrayal of Guinevere, and at least made her feel sympathetic. She's a hard character to get sympathy for, as you pointed out. She's not supposed to be your favorite character in the book, any more than Lancelot is. Now, what I will say about Lancelot, and I know that T has mentioned this, is that when I did that, I've also seen very bad portrayals of Lancelot. Oftentimes, sometimes he's either portrayed as the awesome hero, or he's portrayed as a wimp that's, sort of pretending to be a badass. Pretty boy. That was certainly Winter King and others that portrayed him that way. I kind of took the attitude that this should be the best knight that there is, but he's still a dick. We don't like him. He's not a nice person. He's not a good person. He's not a sympathetic character, but he should still be someone that you would not want to fight with. And so and I found that there were lots of good ways of portraying that. George may not respect Lancelot one bit, but he doesn't turn his back on him. Leave the guy. He doesn't take the attitude of, I could just take this guy. It's never that. It's
right.
Always fighting him would be a very, very bad idea.
Huh. Yeah, that's that makes me like your Lancelot a bit more, actually. Just the idea behind it. I think you did well with that, actually. I always think it's like, I think in a little bit I think it even works a little bit like that because you don't really have like this Knights of the Round Table thing going on, right? It's not all high romance. It's not late medieval like.
Well, there is the Round Table. I did portray the Round Table. Of course, I kind of took it a little bit of a different way, but I tried to keep very much to canon. It was still Lendegrins that bought the table and all of that. Of course, I didn't end the way that it does in the canon. But one of the things about the actual canon books, if you look at Ides of the King and Le Morte d'Arthur, is that you don't see, unlike a lot of the movie and television adaptations where it's Arthur comes in and takes the throne and everything is good now. In a lot of those books, his rise to the throne was not inevitable or even something most people wanted. And when you look at some aspects of the Round Table, you go, really? People were good with that? One of the best lines is actually from the musical Camelot, which I took almost nothing from, but we're going to bring it up here because it does portray this bit very well. And that is, he goes, oh, I have a solution for how we're going to build the Round Table. We're going to make it a great big party. It'll be very fashionable, and all the knights will want to be part of this. And I'm doing well, okay, so let me get this straight. So these guys are going to give up their nation's sovereignty and independence because they want to go and party in Camelot. And you think when you think of it that way, you just think the only thing I could think of was that scene in Monty Python where they're all singing and dancing, and it's like, really, this can't be a good idea. Nobody could have gone for this.
Sounds reasonable to me. I mean,
then when you read like the oldest stuff, like the Magaborn and History of the Kings, you find that the way that Arthur recruited his people was in a way that it was in an interesting way, because they say that he recruited his people by basically throwing these big competitions with these really expensive prizes. But if you wanted to compete, you had to swear loyalty to him and swear to fight for him. And that's how he ends up with this big army that he's able to, establish his domain in. And that just seemed that's okay. I'm giving spoilers to my other books, but that kind of felt very interesting to me. So I liked the idea, and it worked very well with the idea of a rival king, of some of these kingdoms not being on the same side, basically. Caroselby and Camelot, both of these are, if you look at the history there, both of those locations were basically strongholds of the Britons for various reasons. Caroselmian was actually is by the archaeology and scholarship, one of the last Briton kingdoms to actually fall. It lasts for a very long time. And it was reportedly held by a giant. There's very scattered little things about it. But a lot of it comes from the Saxons.
Gotta love Saxons, unless you're Britain.
No, actually, and that was the other point. As you pointed out, not all of these Saxons would have been against them. These Saxons had been there for almost 100 years by the point that I set my book at. So the idea that they would have been, it's not. The idea is that there would have been a lot more mixing than you would have thought, and especially with the Romano Britons. Many of these people would have attributed themselves to any number of groups that had been, auxiliaries in the Roman army kind of thing. So you would have had Saxons, you would have had Franks, you would have had Sarmatians. And you can't really point to one group at that point and say that's this group against that group, because it would have been this whole melting pot. And then it sort of becomes a lot less so after the Saxons take over. but even in like Wales and stuff, it remained sort of this mixed matched hodgepodge of different groups for a very long time.
Yeah, it's always the idea that there's like clear cut like tribal like things going on in the especially the early Middle Ages. Just like it doesn't really work. That doesn't it just wasn't happening basically.
Right. And I will take this opportunity to point out another fact. One thing that I don't like about a lot of Arthurian adaptation is that it takes a very 9th and 10th century, Viking Age view of how people would have looked at the Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
If we're looking at the 6th, 5th century, the Roman Empire has only just fallen. The distance between like the Battle of Catalonia and all of the end of the final battles of the Roman Empire would only have been 80, 90 years away from most of these people. So to put that in context, it would have been the same amount of distance as you and I are to World War II. Your grandfather, you would have known people, grandfathers and, old men that you would have met that would have talked about, the age of the Romans. It wouldn't have been this distant myth. It would have been this near myth. So we would have seen it very much as we see so many of these battles. We would have been viewed very much the way that we would view Stalingrad today. They're fighting with older weapons. They're fighting in a format that you don't fight in anymore because the warfare is just different. But it's still something recognizable that you recognize as not the distant past. These were people that thought and felt the same way as us.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think there's like this trope in fantasy where a lot of things like fade slowly, but like the collapse of Rome, at least in Britannia, was actually rather swift. There was people who'd be born living in these Roman cities, and by the end of their lives, they were burying their treasure and living out in like a little thorp by themselves or something.
That was the other thing. If you read certain history books, they will say that like, oh, this must have been this gradual thing, and Hadrian's Wall only got deserted after like centuries. And then when you read like anything else, like for instance, the Welsh Triads are one of the best examples. They pretty much say all the legions and all the soldiers of Britain left with Constantine to fight the Vandals. And we know that they did this. We know that they did this because there are Frankish accounts and there are accounts by the Goths and everybody else about the terrifying Britons and how scary these people were. And just like even the Britons weren't enough to beat this army back kind of thing. That kind of language is being used. And it was one of those very interesting things because I'd already tied in North Africa and the Vandals. And so I kind of did so if the Britons were the boogeymen, then we have a tie-in here. Because it is kind of interesting that, Geiseric's generation, the people that would have wiped them out would have wiped out these Vandals and would have been these massive, devastating defeats to the Vandals and the Suebi were Britons. It was just because those were the soldiers that came over.
Right. Yeah, and that shows. I think that's a good example also of just how small the world was actually at the time. Like we think of it like all scattered and isolated, but
that's the other point. It wasn't isolated. Most of the people that you even hear about it. Okay, so they'll say in one moment that they were isolated communities, that nobody ever moved around and nobody knew what was going on, in the next valley. And then in the next statement, those same history books will talk about how important the traveling artisans were. And if you read like the Magabord and stuff, they basically say, we are not letting anyone into the feast unless they're a king or unless they're a tradesman who has his craft with him. So these craftsmen were moving around. You didn't have a lot of blacksmiths and stuff. And even if you did, once you fixed everybody's plow and everybody got their sword sharpened, you didn't have much. You weren't really your business model wasn't going to last here. So a lot of people would have moved around. You would have had a lot of movement. It was only about the time of like Alfred the Great and the Saxons and everybody, where everybody started settling down again and started getting these communities. But the reason that the Dark Ages didn't leave much behind was because it was still the migration period. Everyone was still moving around. Nobody was building anything because you might not be there in 6 months or in a year, or or if you built something nice, you were just inviting the raiders to come and burn it down.
Right. Yeah. Strange Mentality Paper has joined us. Hello, Amanda. And that was actually something I recently got reminded of, actually, because I just finished The Anglo-Saxons by Mark Morris, and he talked about
That
how
was a good book. I read
yeah,
that.
I liked it. But he talked about how they knew. I mean, even if we read like a lot of Old English like poetry and stuff, like everything is temporary, and that's what they talk about all the time. And like they would build these halls, and they knew that hall would burn down, right? Like they didn't expect it to last for the ages. They didn't. I mean, there's no reason for it to. You know what I mean? Like
this isn't the Franks who are building up these beautiful, castles that are going to stand for 1,000 years and making it. And that was why the Franks built those castles. If you think about it, we're trying to show you all that we're here to stay, whereas all your former lords were prepared for the end and the dystopia to come next week. So we're going to offer you stability where they wouldn't.
Right. Yeah, and that's definitely a interesting thing to go. I really like I don't like the term Dark Ages, but I like that
I don't
the time
either.
period. So
Right, the Dark Ages is just the period that we've called it because for a historian, it's a black spot. That would be the better bet. There isn't.
Yeah.
When it looks, people go like, oh, like how do you keep so close to the history? And my answer is, there just isn't that much history to stay canon to.
Right.
You got snippets here. I got single paragraphs saying that there was a battle, and that this person might have betrayed that person, but it might have gone the other way around.
Right, especially like right where the time period you're writing, that is like the murkiest like probably time period you could ask for. Like
even places where that like there, even like with the Byzantines and stuff, where you go, there should be more records. But the other point is that and I'm gonna just take this moment to go off on my lovely little tangent here. There's often a lot of people that go, do you believe that King Arthur was real? And I go, that's not the right question. The question is, was there an individual that did a lot of the things in Arthurian lore happen? And my answer is yes, we know they happened. But as for the chronicles and all of this, the miracle is that we have as much as we do. Because when you think about it, you have the collapse of the Roman Empire and the Saxon invasion. And they're not going to be, this was the first pagan invasion. And so all of those records that are being kept in churches and Roman villas and everything, they're all burned. And then what survives is held on to by the Welsh and monks, and later on, even the Saxons get into, figuring out what the actual history was here. And then what happens? The Vikings come in and burn everything. Everywhere that you would have put any kind of archive is just burned to the ground by the Vikings. And that war lasts a long time. And then even if you go through that, then you eventually get to the Frankish invasion, and the Franks and Normand and William the Conqueror and all of his lot considered the Arthurian legend to be part of their justification for their invasion. So all of that's gonna so now we have to doctor history, because anything that doesn't jibe with we rule all of England, that gotta go. Then we go even further, because we have that coming and going through the ages, peaking in the War of the Roses, where obviously we get Le Morte d'Arthur and that whole tradition. But the Tudors were quite big on the whole, we're going to have one cohesive narrative, and we're not going to play with it. And then comes the Protestant Reformation, and they gather up all the books and they put them in one library. And you know what's going to happen here, because you've read Beowulf and you've read the Tolkien stories. You know what's happening to this library. The bit with Beowulf and Gawain and the Green Knight. And we can assume that if this library is built like a regular library and every other library in history, we can guess what else was on those shelves in that section that just burned to the ground. So all of that, so we lose. So the amount, if there was Arthurian texts that we could have gone back to, those are gone, because that's where we lost them. We can point to the place where we probably lost most of it. And if you look at the records and the archives, you can say we lost a lot of Arthur here. And if it was on the mainland, well, it was the Tudor claim to England, and so all the Vatican and the Jesuits, they weren't too big on the whole, let's keep all that stuff around. That had that sort of unhaul kind of thing going on. You know, when you see the unhauls and all the books go into the book, we've all seen them. But then, even if you go further on and say that there must have still been stuff that lasted into the 20th century, it all got gathered up. If it was in mainland Europe, it all got gathered up by the SS, because Himmler was big on his whole, we're going to make a new round table kind of thing. And so he wanted control of the whole Arthur narrative. He wanted all of it. And he brought it all to a creepy little castle in the middle of nowhere. And that all burned. And then when the Allies closed in, the SS burned it to the ground. So there we have why we have no Arthurian, canon as it is. That's where it all went.
Yeah, that's a man. Sorry, no, it's a great tragedy of what you just recited. But no,
it is, but it's still the whole thing. It's like,
yeah, no, it is. It's and it's nice though at the same time, because it's a miracle, right? I think. I mean, that we have things like Beowulf, and that what we have is what we have, right? I mean, like, I'm glad we have that. There's a chance at some point when that place, I think one of the places Beowulf was in that burned down was the Ashburnham House, which is a terrible name for a library. There's a good chance it got thrown out a window, to be saved from the fire. That's dumb as hell, but that's also like, how close, you know what I mean? Were we to losing
not having Beowulf? And if we don't have Beowulf, we don't read any Viking fantasy. Hell, we don't have any fantasy to begin with, because if we don't have Beowulf, Tolkien doesn't do his translation, and we just don't have Beowulf. We don't have The Hobbit. We don't have any of the books we love. But I'll honestly be the one. But like I said in the beginning of my little tirade there at the start of my books, is that these legends, they endured because they were that important. They were that important to the people that survived. They were that important um, to history, and that's why they endure to this day. And I believe will continue to be made into and adapted. I mean, we get a new Robin Hood every 5 years. We get a new King Arthur movie every 10 or so. And I suspect we will continue to do so simply because people enjoy them.
Yes, yeah, I don't think it'll stop. I mean, some people complain about certain things like that, like, but when it's something, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of superheroes. If I were to come out and say that,
I'll agree with you. I don't like superheroes.
okay, so I don't really care when a new superhero movie comes out, but I do like it when I can get a new take on something like Arthur, even something like that came out last year, The Green Knight, which I didn't super enjoy. You know, it was still
I did not
interesting.
love that movie, but I like bits of it. There were bits
Right.
of it I found good. And just like I said, you can find bits of every King Arthur adaptation that are worth something, that are a good take on it. I'm trying to think of what I liked for The Green Knight. You know what I liked for The Green Knight? I liked the ending.
Yeah, I like that ending too.
I liked the ending. I'm going to say that. I did not love much of the movie, but I liked the ending. I also liked the representation of the Round Table and the Court of Camelot as well. I thought that was well done and well made.
Mm-hmm.
Just how they represented the round, just the setting and how they
Yeah.
presented the knights and just all of that. I thought that was good. But as I said, I didn't like much of what I saw in Clive Owen's King Arthur, but I could find those bits of it that I really enjoyed. And the same is true with Excalibur. Less so with Monty Python, because I have to say I enjoyed the entire Monty Python, The Holy Grail, from start to finish. But that's just me.
It is a great movie. It's a classic for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest, and as I said, I take something from every 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 bit, and I did certainly take my Lady of the Lake from him because I just took that as this great example of how this would have gone down.
Yeah. No, it's
But I'll also point out here one of the hardest things to write when you're writing King Arthur is that how you get Excalibur. That is not an easy bit of King Arthur to write because it's the one bit you have to have.
yes.
You're required. You can pick and choose what knights you're gonna use. You can even pick and choose if you can even like totally not involve Guinevere or Morgana. You can come up with completely new villains if you want, but you gotta do the sword. The sword has to come out of the stone, and somehow the Lady of the Lake has to be involved. And those are two not compatible. They're not exactly just easily compatible because in the original canons, they're not even the same sword. But somehow now we've decided that they have to be the same sword. One has to come out. It has to come out of a stone. It has to find its way into a lake, and the Lady of the Lake has to give it back to you.
Yes.
This is a hard plot problem to solve.
That is definitely a confusing thing. I think, I think you handle it pretty well, and I also think Merlin they spread that out through a couple seasons. I think.
I liked how Merlin did it. We actually had this fight already, but I'm gonna just summarize it for everybody else. The only thing I disliked about how they did the sword in Merlin was that in most of the movies, it's the sword that conveys kingship and power, to Arthur. And in Merlin, that is definitely not the case. It's the fact that, he's Arthur that is the reason that he's king. He's, grown up to be king.
Yeah.
Everybody's expected him to be king. And that works in there. But as you can tell, I took a lot of how Merlin did it to make my sword, though it was a lot nastier and grittier in Badon Hill and Gurzil. That's very much I liked the idea that the dragon makes the sword, and then the sword then ends up in the stone, and then it somehow gets to the Lady of the Lake.
Mm-hmm.
I liked that progression, and I worked with that and tried to do a what if statement, because that's when you write. That is the, everybody who writes, it's always the what if. What if we did it this way? What if this happened? And that's actually why I started writing King Arthur in the first place, because King Arthur is the ultimate what if statement. You take the story and you say this base novel, and you say, what if this? Well, what would this have looked like if it was real? So what would Merlin have been historically? And most people come up with, he would have been a druid. Makes sense.
Right.
I did like the whole, obviously, when they did what if Guinevere shows up? What would Guinevere be? I didn't like the idea of her just showing. There's been a lot of them where she shows up as this, damsel in distress. But as I've said in other ones, I don't like the fact that a lot of the portrayals portray the Arthurian women as these basically hostage girls. If you read a lot of them, even a lot of the Guinevere stuff, like Knight of the Cart and everything, they don't really need much rescuing. And actually, the one that's done it really well, and I always go with this one, is I did not like the game, and I never got into the game, but the beginning I loved. Because the NPC in Elden Ring, the NPC comes out and says, yeah, but see, you're screwed because you're maidenless. You don't have a maiden, so you're just going to die. And in most Arthurian lit, that's the case. If you don't have your lady backing you up, you get ambushed. You get like die of terrible infections. You just starve to death in some cases. It's not good for you. A knight in the original Arthurian canons and Monty Arthur that doesn't have a lady with him, it is the life expectancy of someone wearing a red shirt in an original Star Trek episode.
Okay. Yeah. That is very fair. Oh man, okay. I wasn't expecting to make that reference. Anyways,
well, come on, it's the case. But
I was gonna say one of the things you said about how you were, getting the whole Sword and Stone, Lady of the Lake thing to work out, and you described it as grittier. I've seen you label your books as grimdark.
That's a terrible, terrible genre, but it's others that have it gets labeled there by reviewers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I would call it, because when I started writing it, I called it just fantasy or historical fiction, because I hadn't met a historical, because historical fantasy there's not a lot of it if you think about it. And if you go onto Amazon and search historical fantasy, you're going to get things that certainly don't fit into that genre as far as you would think of it. You'll get things like The Witcher is considered historical fantasy. Game of Thrones is considered historical fantasy. Basically anything that has a historical, because anything that has a historical setting but doesn't have much magic in it is considered fantasy. But by that ilk, you could say that Tolkien is historical fantasy because, save for a few instances, Gandalf and the other magic users don't sling a lot of magic. And that's actually one of the things that's carried through from Arthurian lore and why why Gandalf is written in the way he is, I think, because Merlin only uses magic 3 times in any of the original books. There are 3 instances, and they're not that impressive. The rest of the time, it's him scheming, and you almost do and lots of other characters almost do can you actually do magic? Because we're not buying it.
Well, I mean, yeah.
But I only mentioned that because my editor actually came out and said, people are going to want your Merlin to throw down more magic. And I, for that reason, kind of explained that, no, Merlin doesn't have any magic because anything the Druids had, they lost when the Romans burned Mona to the ground. And that's a pretty good example of where we could, again, an example of tragedies where we lost a huge amount of tradition because the Druids didn't write anything down. So once you killed all the Druids, there's no one that knows. That's why there really isn't any, there's Irish mythology, but there really isn't any British mythology, save for the stuff that sort of came out of Rome, like Sullus and, a few references that we have from there that were part of sort of the Celtic revival after the fact, after the Romans left. But we don't have anything telling us what the Britons, what the Iceni gods were, or any of that, because it's just gone.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate, actually. I think the idea that sorry, I'm really tired. So if I'm really slow to say,
talking so much. I mean, welcome to the. We've been at this for an hour. We might have to call a 10-minute marker or something before we both pass out. Well, right, have a 10-minute coffee break.
Yeah, I generally go to sleep early because I get up early in the morning. I don't work tomorrow, but
yeah, neither do. Obviously, it's the same thing for me. But I do know that the little one's going to wake me up at 5. This is probably yours.
Yeah, right, exactly.
They get up with the sun. When does the sun come up?
Thankfully, it comes up a little later since it's getting, later in the year. But
yeah, they don't wake me up at 4 a.m. anymore.
Yeah. Anyways, Drew did have a comment about historical fantasy. Well, you have 3. He says historical fantasy works for me. Talking about War of the Wrath, or Gurzil and Badon Hill. And then he says historical fantasy for me at least has to be set in our world during a historical period in our history. And then thus Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings don't count, nor does The Witcher.
I would agree with Drew, as I usually do.
Yeah.
But if you actually think about it, there isn't a lot of stuff that falls into the historical fantasy bit. I mean, a lot of, Brandon Cromwell and all of that, his stuff is certainly historical fiction. There is no magic. Even when there is magic, it's always exposed to be just a hoax. The only other, I'll be honest, I found 2 other good examples recently of historical fantasy. One is Children of Gods and Fighting Men, which is a very good book that I've just finished. And that one's come out about a month ago. And the other one that I've just found and just started reading is The Cornish Princess. And I can't say much about that one because I've only read about half of it. And it does seem to be, at the point that I'm at, there's a lot of backstory here, but it does feel like it's going in a very romance novel direction. and I don't know how I feel about that, but I haven't finished it yet. We'll see where I go with this trilogy. I'll let you all know.
We'll see. Yeah, let us know.
Um,
One thing I do like about historical fantasy is that a lot of times when you do get magic in it, though, since it's not like a whole secondary world, the magic seems more authentic, more like it was taken from the real world because it's set in the real world. I mean, not always, but like I think of like DJ Butler's stuff, which his is all like
Yep.
American, like time period, but still, or even something like which is a little odd compared to most historical fantasy, I'd say, but like The Dragon Waiting by John M. Ford.
I haven't read that one.
It's pretty good. It's standalone too, but one thing also that Drew said that that I don't know connected in my brain real quick here, as he says, this second part, he says historical fantasy for me at least has to be set in our world during a historical period in our history, and then that just I was like, wow, okay, that makes a lot of sense because I've seen people.
It does. Actually, I just connected something in my head reading that myself, because when I actually connected it, I remember, like many people, I read a lot of the Jim Butcher novels and the Mercy Thompson novels, which are urban fantasy, which is fantasy set in our world in a modern time frame. And if you think about how they present magic, it's very similar, actually, because the magic somehow has to be under some sort of shroud. Gurzil, people believe that Gurzil is real when they see it, until they actually meet Gurzil, at which point you have that I didn't want to know it was real. But, when Alba's going there, he's convinced that all he's going to find is some crazy cult and worshiping an idol, that he finds a dragon and goes, okay, this is I'm out. But and even with Kahina and Merlin to some extent, where they're either pretending that they have more magical powers than they actually have, or the magic that they do have access to is not pretty. I mean, that's I look at it as, if you look at what magic was in the Middle Ages and some of these witch trials, and not all, and yes, some of those witch trials, when you read the accounts, they were just, we felt like burning a woman today. And some of them, however, it was, this person would have been today condemned as a serial killer, and we called them a werewolf or a vampire or a witch because they were ritually murdering babies. And it's like, okay, you know what? Burn that person. I don't care what you call them. But again, it really did sort of speak to the idea that, that much of this, and if T was still here, I would say, there is a Christian tradition that he says that you don't let the witches stick around, that magic isn't something you're supposed to play with. And yes, when you read about a lot of what many of these cultures said or considered magic, sure, some of it is herbs and just decent ceremonies that are just cultural. And some of it is very brutal, very dark stuff that you just frankly don't want to play with. And I went with that kind of aspect for my magic system. Without going into spoilers, Kahina has to do some pretty nasty shit to get the demon hyenas to show up. Yes. And any kind of magic Gurzil's doing, it's requiring a lot of dead bodies.
Well, yes, for sure. I mean, it is Gurzil. Um,
Yeah.
that's a, it's a. I have a couple more thoughts based off that. I guess is that it makes me think of, especially when you think of like witch. I think the ancient world idea of like magic was more of like it was the negative. Like magic was like it was foreign and it was therefore bad. Essentially, because um,
Well, even the
they
stuff we were doing was mostly curses and stuff.
Yeah, and even then though, it's just like a lot of like even if we go to the Christian era, I mean, a lot of Christians were practicing what we would call magic, probably. But the difference was they were initiated, right? It's like it's not magic because it's just our thing. You know what I mean? It's religion.
Right.
And the difference was generally just a level of acceptance.
Yeah.
That's basically the difference. And so.
I kind of, and people will hate me because it really is a blood-soaked book, and it really does include a lot of stuff that was certainly taken out of context. Is not going to lead you down good paths. But the Hammer of Witches, I did actually like that one quote that I included, which is that magic is not worshiping some obscure cult or some
Mhm,
some little or some little or some heathen ritual. It is a
mhm.
complete abjugation of faith and what is acceptable and just human decency. And when you look at some of the other cultures, like even some of the Aztec cultures and stuff, you find that people weren't like going, "Oh yay, yay, rah rah, cut that person's head off." It was done by small but very powerful and very dark groups.
Yes, that's some dark. There's a lot of dark stuff that goes on in like
In
history,
history.
right? Which is why I think historical fantasy or even historical fiction works well because often our world is stranger than pure fiction. Um, but again, back to Drew's comment because he kind of continues here because
No,
Drew
we've
is
been
a
off on
great
a tangent.
commenter.
We're tired.
But I think it's interesting that again this historical period thing because he says down here right after is like the Lord of the Rings doesn't count, and it's funny because some people would say the Lord of the Rings probably is historical fiction because it is technically set in our world, but it's like
It sets
antediluvian,
it in a
you
world
know.
prior. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and so it's not if you go to Drew's previous comment, it's not a historical period, right? So like, or at least according to our history.
He was writing but again, you got to remember, he was writing at a point where the genre he was writing didn't really exist in the
Hmm.
format he was writing it in. You didn't have new worlds. Everything, you know, where is it? We got King Arthur here. King Arthur is set in our world. It
Hmm.
is technically historical fantasy. Arabian Nights, again, set in our world, technically historical fantasy. Even books that came before him, like the novel like Tarzan and King Solomon's Mines, and even John Carter
Hmm.
and Dracula, and all of these, they're still set in a historical framework in our time period, in our real
Hmm.
world. So until we get to Lewis Carroll's Narnia and um, Tolkien's Middle Earth, you didn't have this. So he brought us. So he tried very hard and was, in my opinion, quite successful at trying to tell you that no, this is really part of your world, and it justifies all of your understandings of your world, but it's before us. It's Middle Earth. It's this forgotten period of history
Hmm.
that he couldn't, that frankly, he couldn't. I think that there's a lot of his own Arthurian theories in Middle Earth that he couldn't. When you read his Arthur, The Fall of Arthur, which I highly recommend because it was a good book. Um, you can see that he almost seems to stop at bits. Like he doesn't know how he's going to because his day job is he's a linguist, he's a historian, so he has to so if he writes an author text, he has to justify everything. But he doesn't. He writes Middle Earth, and there is a Thorian bit that I'm not going to tell you about that I do think he believed, because when I looked at it, that's where I went in my head was to Tolkien and said that makes. So now I see what he was thinking here. In the Return of the King, and that will be a later book, but there is a lot there. Certainly, the entire Aragorn backstory is the story of Ambrose Aurelius. If you read what little there is, and you just plug in Aragorn instead of Ambrose, it reads exactly like that appendix, just straight up.
I'll have to check that out.
It really is pretty good. That the whole actually, you want to know what there is? There was a great YouTube movie. Okay, there was not a great YouTube movie. It was a terrible YouTube movie, but it really did talk about the whole. It was based on that whole appendix, and it was called, I think. Oh, I don't know what it was called now. If you search YouTube, and I'm gonna find it.
Since you brought this topic up, that just reminded me of Tolkien did a similar thing that the TV show Merlin did, because Aragorn has his power because he is the king. Really, some people chalk it up, especially in the movie that Jackson did, that it's the sword that gives him that authority, but it's really has the authority because he's king.
Yes, and that's why he's able to. Why the Nazgul run away from him, as opposed to where they would just slaughter everybody else, because he is a king of righteousness, whereas they are kings of darkness.
Mm-hmm.
But and I will say this as well. We'll just take this moment when we're on Tolkien to point out that there were a lot of other things in Tolkien, and when I'm writing, part of me is going, there were bits of Tolkien I wanted to see way more of, and he never did. For instance, I would have, and it is my biggest complaint about Peter Jackson's adaptations, is that he completely cut the Dunedain out. And frankly, I would have liked to see in a movie, I would have liked to see more about the Dunedain. I would have liked to see the Battle of Soundford, where the riders beat the Dunedain, where the riders are going through the defenders. I would have liked to see, some scenes where the Rangers are doing their Ranger stuff. Where they're defending the people of, the North, and sort of being this sort of check on the darkness that's rising. I would have liked to see that. And the other, I'll also say this: because if he's still on, he probably went to bed. But if he was the one that pointed out that the last character in the final chapter of Badon Hill reminded him of the Black Numenorian Queen from Unfinished Tales. And oh yes, she was based off of that, because that character was based off of a number of other Byzantine queens that sort of all came together. But in my opinion, but maybe it was a completely original thing. But there were a lot of queens that sort of fit into that category. Certainly the idea of black obsidian statues. There were a number of Roman cults that used them, and a number of Phoenician cults that used, these black obsidian mirrors, and you get the old mirror on the wall kind of thing. Yeah, you had creepy mirrors. lots of creepy mirrors in the Dark Ages. It's a whole trope, but
Yeah, it's a great one.
it is a great one. It is, and I will come out and say that the idea of the evil cat lady just stuck with me for some reason, and I felt that character needed more life, and desperately wanted to just be able to include that quote at the end of that chapter from Unfinished Tales, and just quote it to Tolkien, or quote it to at least the Red Book of Westmarch. And I went as far as to contact the Tolkien people and ask for permission to do that, and they said, sure, you could have that for $250 for the U.S. rights, not for the world rights. The world rights are another about $1,000 a quote. And I did
Wow.
no. I'll find a different one. Thank you kindly.
Oh my.
I'll change the lady's name and I'll get a different quote. It's like, because it's not that original a character.
Just let me reword this a second.
Give me a moment. I gotta rewrite this paragraph. We're not. But that said, though, it is one of those other things that with the quotes, I am quite careful. In most of my cases, I actually have to go and through a variety of sources. We'll move on to your lovely little complaint here. Through a variety of sources, I usually try to find my own translation. Between you can usually find the original source document with some difficulty these days, without going and digging into them. But most of these archives at the moment, all the digital renderings are up, so you can get a transcript in Latin of most of these. And thanks to Google, you can get several different translations and decide what word works best for my thing. And you could say that that's wrong and that that's not the way that history should be done, but historians do it themselves, and I'm a fiction writer, and so I don't have to care. But I'm going to say that I do know that one of your issues is you go, why do the Goths and the Germans? Okay, you do realize that when I did actually ask my narrator when I was writing Badon Hill, that I brought that up. His first response was not something I'm going to repeat here because it was rather vulgar. His second response was to plead, please don't do this to me. I don't want to do any more dead languages.
Yeah, well, no, that's completely understandable. Gothic is a tough one too, honestly.
Yeah. I don't even. I tried. I actually just go when it came to things like the origins of the Goths, which I've just started getting into because I came up with a brilliant concept that I then decided to hate myself because I started reading some of these Gothic texts and did that. Why for the love of God, why?
Yeah. Is that the Jordanus one? Is that?
That was one of them, and then there's a couple others. He's not so bad. The ones I found that I've liked are the ones that were translated by other people into other languages and then moved on.
Well, okay, yeah, sure, I guess. No, that's understandable. I think it's funny actually when you talk about translation though, because it's hard enough when you're translating Old English to modern English, when they're it's both English, so yeah.
You want the fun one? You translate when you read the Beowulf translation that's done by Tolkien, and then you read the Seamus translation or the Healy translation. He's even more removed. They are not the same thing.
Yes.
You go are these the same thing? And when you look up some of the words that are different, you go, okay, so they could mean multiple things. And actually, that's where I got the idea of waiting, because they don't because when you look at some of these terms in like Beowulf, one person said, "Well, that seems to be scouting," but when you hear what the context, it doesn't sound like they're scouting. It sounds like they're waiting.
Right. Yeah. That's the problem. Even when you have a mistake in the manuscript, it's like then you have to rectify that. Too.
Right. So it's like and so even there, I had that really kind of odd idea, like, well, maybe they don't, because what I read was, and it was hard to get a hold of. I can't believe how hard it was to find a copy of it. But the Strategicon, which is the Byzantine military field manual, and it actually has a lot of stuff about how you are supposed to fight Saxon and Frankish shield walls, and with cavalry and without cavalry, and basically they say without cavalry don't do it. There are like, there's a whole line in there that I think I even put it in Gurzil that says, do not go into pitch battle with these people. It's just not going to go well for you. You should try to whittle them down. You should try to do all these things. But finding a copy of that was really hard. And reading through it, though, was very interesting because...
Yeah, I need to find a copy of that.
I found one on Amazon, and then I found one that was used, and therefore not like $50.
You'll have to send me the link to that.
I might just send you. Yeah, because it's not on Kindle. It's one of those. It needs to get on Kindle. I have this idea that maybe I'll just do my own translation and plop it on Kindle and be done with it. But probably not. That's a lot of work. But when you read, what I did was I actually read that one, and I read Out of War. And you can see if you read both of those, you can see real differences in the military ideologies of how these two groups are fighting, and they're not necessarily, one isn't wrong and one isn't right, but it is definite mix that you see, and it seems to carry through even into like the Crusades and some of the battles we see there, that East and West are not fighting in the same kind of style that we would think of. And one of the interesting things is that when you find places in Western history, in medieval history, where they're using more of a Sun Tzu kind of strategy, they're not talking like this is a good. They're put out as like they won, but they were evil. Like they won, but they cheated.
That's funny. That's interesting. I always feel like there's so much to know. I mean, I remember growing up, going through like high school and stuff, thinking like, oh well, this is all pretty basic stuff. Must not be a lot to learn out there. And then like when mostly studies I've done on my own, I was like, wow, there's a lot to learn out there.
Yeah, one of the more interesting ones is that how people portray the use of horses. And I always love this one because you see like on like History Channel and stuff, they do those like reenactments and they have guys with sticks and they're like going, see, the horseman couldn't have done anything useful. And at that point, I'm actually doing the, if you put me on Durango, which is a thoroughbred war horse I trained, or a thoroughbred, just a thoroughbred racing horse, I mean. Mm-hmm. Basically the equivalent of a war horse kind of animal. And a relatively small and not very intimidating individual was to charge a group of linebackers. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't go well for the linebackers. Maybe it wouldn't go well for me in the end, but it would not go. But I could do that without believing I was gonna just die. So one of the interesting things is if you read like Tolkien did not ride horses. Tolkien's if you look at it, Tolkien, horses are big, mean things with teeth. In most of the Lord of the Rings, and people that can ride them are very impressive people. And then if you read something like Lewis Carroll, who was like a polo player and rode horses in the war and everything, he's riding them, and the horses talk to the riders and stuff. So just the way that horses, that just depends on whether or not that was part of your experience in life. If you didn't know if you don't understand how you can ride a horse, then that's just not something you know how to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. That's definitely fair.
I think we're at the time. I'm going to fall asleep, man.
Yeah, we should probably. Let's go through a couple of comments real quick. Jonathan Rosenmel. I'm gonna. Sorry, I probably said that wrong. He said, "Hey, what's going on, gentlemen?" And then Change Mentality Paper asked the question that we did cover at the beginning, but I mean, if you want to give a short answer, she says,
yeah. Well, as I said at the beginning, I find it easier to write if I'm anonymous. And the other reason is that it's the subject matter is the legend of St. George, the legend of King Arthur, and I don't believe that those belong to anyone in particular, and that they're communal property, as Liam put so eloquently. And so I prefer the idea of remaining anonymous and letting that remain this communal property, because so much else has in that legendarium has remained anonymous as well. Gawain and the Green Knight is anonymous. Beowulf is anonymous. Even Le Morte d'Arthur, we don't know who Sir Thomas Mallory was. There are some records, but in reality, but all he's called is the Night Prisoner in most of his original stuff. So Thomas Mallory is just who kind of we've latched onto as the author of that, but nobody knows, in fact, who he was. He could have been one of several characters in the War of the Roses. So I take the attitude that it doesn't go. The other point is, we'll add that in there, it doesn't go very well for those people that write Arthurian lit and use their name. It seems to almost be a curse when you look at how some of these writers that finished their author writing ended up.
Okay. And then just real quick, the Bookish Gnome stopped by, said, asked us how we're doing. And then, let's see, Drew is being a very good commenter throughout, and he just left. So goodbye.
Yeah,
Drew.
he had to go to sleep.
Yeah, yes.
1 o'clock here.
Us too, Drew.
Yeah,
but no, it was really fun to have you on. Thanks for coming on. Thanks, even though it's late and whatnot. But
yeah.
It's been fun. This is the first live thing I've actually done on my channel, so I'd say it was a success. So,
yeah.
And again, you can go and get Badon Hill digitally for free, I believe.
Don't forget that. You guys get right now for the next 2 days. Badon Hill is out for free on Amazon. You can just go and download it. You just hit download, and it's free on Amazon. Goes right to your Kindle, and then you can go on and grab either the audiobook or the Kindle version or the hardback if you like of the Gurzil. There will be 3 days of Gurzil coming up. Please just buy it. Make me feel better. Books are expensive to produce. Just kidding. I like all readers, but please, if you do get the free download, do be a good sport about it and leave a review. Even reviews that aren't 100% stellar. If I DNF'd it after 15 pages, it is a little bit brutal, but we can take it. I'll take it. Fine. The first 15 pages were not great. I get that it was a bit of a slow start and that people felt a little lost at the beginning, especially in Gurzil. But give it a chance. Usually, most people that didn't go to the end say that even if they felt it was a little clipped off at the end and they wanted more, they will pretty much. I know one of the biggest complaints was I felt there should be more at the end, and then I go on to Badon Hill, and Badon Hill obviously is going to lead into. I have several working titles for the third one, but we'll see which one I end up with.
Yeah. Well, I will just give my little. Yes, you should read these. These are just. I mean, I'm not big. I'm not big on gushing on my channel. I like to stay pretty mellow.
I was going to say,
But these have been some of my favorite reads this year, along with other things like by authors like Christopher Rocchio and Gene Wolfe. So I think
I have to read
generally high praise.
I've actually talked to Rocchio on like Discords and stuff, and I still haven't gotten around to reading his stuff, and I feel so bad about that.
Well, that's fine.
Every time you put out a review on it, I'm like, I almost don't want to watch the review because I so want to read the series. I just haven't got there. My book writing takes up all my reading time.
And that's fine. That's understandable too. So, but I guess we'll let everyone get to sleep. A good morning
Thank
to
you
maybe
for
someone.
tuning in to late night, midnight. We're all so tired. I'm talking too much, and he's falling asleep on me.
You're okay. You're good. But yeah, we'll catch everyone later again. So
Later.
bye.